Thank you. So I am going to talk about different times and different coffee with the U.S. focus. Before I get started, I really must recognize my colleague Heather Ward, who is the research analyst for SCAA, and she has conducted a lot of the research that you'll see here, as well as provided some analysis on existing research and historical data going back 60 years. So today, what we've heard a lot about terroir. We've heard a lot about bold predictions. We've heard a lot of different perspectives on branding. And one of the things that we've emphasized somewhat subtly is our desire to serve the coffee consumer or the retailer and to develop coffees that speak to the consumer and grow the specialty segment. I'm going to focus today specifically on the U.S. market, but I hope that that's relevant to everyone in the audience here, even though the U.S. is just one part of the world. It is a very large consuming country, and we have seen that sometimes there are some trends, and you'll see, I was very happy to see in Jason's presentation earlier, there are a couple things that he's pointed out from the research they conducted in China that I saw really strong parallels, so that was exciting. The three things I'm going to focus on here, just the consumption. Most of the data and the research for the U.S. market has been conducted by SCAA's sister association, which is an American coffee association called the NCA, National Coffee Association. They are over 100 years old. They have been conducting consumer-driven research for more than 60 years. And then these other two, the Specialty Coffee Retail Sentiment Index and the Specialty Coffee Price Index, these are newer ongoing research projects that have been conducted mostly through by SCAA. So within, not just in research, but in all things specialty coffee at SCAA and elsewhere, we talk a lot about the consumer perspective. And sometimes we think about this idea of then and now. In the research realm especially, often what we're referring to is kind of this post-war, post-World War II, 1950s era of the US market. And then we think about now, we think of more the modern, on-the-go consumer. We're going to talk a little bit in detail about that as well. But just one way that these two consumers are different. Not only would we, if you asked the ladies on the left here, what would you pay for coffee? They would not only be answering a lot lower amount of money, but they would give you an answer talking about the pounds. So they would say 40 cents per pound, which is just under 500 grams, 40 cents per pound. If you ask someone today what they might pay, they'd say, oh, $2 per cup. So not only has the price changed, but also the perspective of where we know consumers, how they think about coffee has changed. So again, this is data that's provided through our sister association, the NCA, National Coffee Association's annual drinking trends data. And by the way, if you want to see this full report for any of the years, it is available for purchase from them. If you're an SCAA member, you can get member pricing on that. So what the way that they ask questions is sort of, this is just a framework. I'm going to explain a little bit in a few more slides when they say gourmet coffee beverages, exactly what they mean. But this is just this is kind of what they're asking people about. So one of the early trends that we saw, total coffee consumption. You can see this is overall coffee consumption in the U.S. has gone down. So you can see that the trend line would predict just overall, and a trend line is an average over time, so you can see the individual peaks and valleys. So total coffee consumption has gone down. Now if we narrow this range so it's only from 1970, you can see that it is still declining, but less quickly. So no surprise, when we look at from 1990 to today, actually we're starting to see the trend line is going up. So although we are overall still having lost consumers from 1950, it's slowing down to the point that actually in the last, that since 1990, we are starting to gain some of that momentum back. Coffee houses became very popular. We've talked a lot about Gen X or millennials. You hear those. Generally, the Gen X are thought of as people born kind of in the early 80s or a little later. And coffee houses became very popular. Of course, Starbucks, we've talked a lot about them today, was growing and creating the cafe culture. And now we can kind of start to understand some of these consumption gaps. The NCA analyzes 4 different age groups. They break it down between 18 to 24, 25 to 39, 40 to 59, and 60 plus. And generally, not surprising when you think about that trend line having decreased since 1950, historically, coffee consumption has skewed older. Many people have stories about their parents or grandparents drinking coffee. Sometimes it's an activity that a lot of people think about or associate with religious activity, post-dinner, the types of activity. Although with the with the growth having changed, starting to shift, that we are actually gaining consumers, not surprisingly, it's because younger people are starting to drink more coffee. You can see the blue line is the younger consumer here, the age 18 to 24, and then ages 25 to 39. So it is still skewing a little bit older, although the US consumption is now starting to appeal more frequently to a younger generation. All right, so thinking back to a couple slides ago, we had 59% of people drinking coffee. That was the last year that the NCA measured data, so I think it was 2013. 59% drinking coffee. Within those within those drinkers, how many cups? What are we really talking about in terms of their consumption? The NCA data showed about 3.2 cups per day, and comparing that to 1970s, the early 70s, on average, the 5 years between 1970 and 1975, that was 3.6 cups per drinker. So it hasn't really changed that much. When we look at that, we're talking the difference between 3.2 and 3.6 cups per day. But looking at the time of day that consumers are drinking coffee, Americans consistently have had coffee for breakfast. About 81% of the drinkers that reported drinking coffee said they did so at breakfast. And in the last 15 years, that has gone down from 89%. So we're starting to see a little bit more diversity in the day, the time of day. And then finally, also, where are people drinking coffee? So about 81% drinking coffee at home. Out-of-home consumption has been steadily increasing over the last couple of years. In 2015, 35% of coffee drinkers are drinking coffee out of the home. So a steady decline starting in around 2008 to 2011. And sometimes, we don't know exactly why that is, but some people do attribute that to the economic recession that was really hitting hard in 2008. All right. Talking about these at-home consumers. So this is specific to at-home consumption only. So it definitely still skews older. You can see that 60-plus age group, 91% report drinking coffee at home. Now comparing it to away-from-home consumption, so whether that's a coffee shop or convenience store, it's all anything that is not prepared by you at home. So we can see that this skews younger, although the largest group is that second group, the age 25 to 39, and then the 18 to 24, just 1 percentage point behind them. So, but overall, you can see that. So overall, just kind of as a general recap, some of the patterns we're seeing. We are seeing more consumers versus 25 years ago, although percentage is not as high as it was in the 50s and 60s. Among age groups, the older consumers are drinking coffee but prefer more to drink it at home, and that's different compared to the younger counterparts. So at the SCAA, we are interested in the types of coffee consumed, particularly specialty. So kind of going back to that NCA graphic, this just kind of breaks down a little bit what, just for the research purposes, what they mean when they ask their respondents, do you drink gourmet coffee? So they specify, and some of the questions actually ask individual reports. I don't have that data here, but that's in the report. So just basically what we mean are espresso-based beverages. You can kind of read along for yourself there, iced, frozen, blended, those types of things. And then what they call, in the study, they call traditional gourmet coffee, which they break into two categories, hot or iced coffee, or brewed with a premium whole bean or ground variety. All right. So with that said, what the NCAA did gather that reflects the percentage of U.S. drinking specialty coffee from 1999 to now, you can see that this increase is actually getting, this is pretty significant, especially compared to how the trend line of the overall consumption was slightly skewing less over time. This is just since 2000, but this is a pretty steep increase from 9% reporting. This is all self-reported, so it doesn't necessarily mean that their habits have changed, but it means that what they identify as their coffee drinking habits are associated with specialty. So we want to know a little bit about, we wanted, at the SCAA, we wanted to know, just like with the total consumption, we kind of wanted to understand how different age groups are interacting with coffee. So this millennial generation born early 80s to the late 90s have the highest percentage of drinking coffee, about 35% in 2015. This is a very big increase from 15% in 2001. So another collection of the data that NCA collected is just the sort of overall market share of specialty cups. So we can see a little bit from year on year, some variation with an overall 8% increase on the trend line. So at the SCAA, we really wanted to build on this, focusing specifically on the specialty market and understanding a little bit more about the data. So in 2012, we started conducting some specialty coffee consumer qualitative research, really finding out what drives people to drink specialty coffee. So this was qualitative research. This is a little bit different than conducting surveys. So what this means is we organized different focus groups. We had 2 different cities, and I think a total of 5 or 6 different focus groups where they had to participate over the course of several weeks. They were given assignments and worked with a professional moderator. One of their assignments was to create collages, which I'm going to talk a little bit about on the next slide. These are our findings. We've concluded that there are 2 different distinct types of specialty coffee drinker, an adopter and a super specialty drinker. So I'll talk a little bit about them, both. So what you can see this here is actually a photograph of one of the assignments that the focus group participants had to create. They were asked to create collages, and so they had, I think, a week to do this, so it was something that they could be thoughtful about, and we had these reported in the SCAA's 2013 SCAA symposium. We had all the collages on display so people could see them. We noticed a number of themes. So this is a great example of one of the themes that we saw, which is that there is an emotional attachment among those who prefer specialty coffee and seek it out. They have an emotional attachment. The quality among this user, and I don't mean this particular collage maker, although this person is included in it, but there were several of them that helped us create and come to these conclusions. Quality was the #1 driver, the idea of having a better, improved experience. it was important enough to go out of your way. Although they did have an emotional attachment, a lot of the collages and some of their own words reporting talked about love. I love it. It's how it's sort of this emotional, it's like a piece of their identity, part of who they are. But we also found that they were not interested in learning. And that might sound a little harsh, but what they really mean in some of the excerpts, they couldn't put it into words, but they, especially when asked about what makes coffee better. So I thought that was just kind of, I always think that's interesting. So quality is the most important thing, but they can't explain it. And they really did not want anyone telling them how to drink their coffee. They didn't want it from packaging. They didn't want it from the retailer interface. They want to be the determinant of the quality. They're happy to seek it out, but they really were not interested in a lesson. So here's another one. This is another one of the collages. So a couple of the things we saw here, you know, the brain power, quality time with themselves, quality time with others, warmth, these sort of things, again, with just examples of what we would summarize as an emotional attachment. This is my personal favorite. This person shows themselves as coffee giving them superpowers. And I think that made me really proud to work for SCAA, really proud to work in specialty coffee, knowing that that's some of the work that we do and how people feel about it. And again, this might not be always what we want to hear. Certainly when we need these types of users say that they aren't interested in learning, that's a little shocking to us as specialty coffee professionals. But it's a little easier to take when you think that we're giving them superpowers, and that might be enough. And so that was what we kind of summarized as those super specialty and the specialty adopter. So as we developed the findings for that, those studies that were conducted in 2012, it gave us opportunities to identify needs for future research. So we wanted to follow that up with a quantitative consumer behavior study, which is a little bit more having to do with surveys and looking for things like the generational patterns and the behaviors specific, especially to the younger audience, because we know that that's our future consumer. So this is where these new research components come in. So that whole first section was devoted mostly to some of the NCA findings and some of the qualitative research done by SCAA. So the Retail Sentiment Index, this is a research project that has been developed over the last 18 months, continue to be developed on a regular basis. So it studies retailers' feelings and attitude toward their business and toward the industry as a whole. We've done this report twice already, and so basically what happens is the survey goes out to the same group of retailers, and you know, sometimes the participants are a little bit different from year to, or from, it's conducted semi-annually, so I think we wanted 4 a year. So this is, we give them this sliding scale, so I'm sorry about the fonts over here, but basically they can rank neutral, positive 100 or negative 100. So instead of just saying yes or no, we get a little bit richer data. And because this is a sentiment index, we need to actually look at both sides. So we surveyed them 6 questions, and so it was the same. Some examples are, do you plan to open a store, close stores, or keep the number of stores the same? And so they would actually have the opportunity to answer neutral, positive, negative. The first report was released for July 2015. So the overall, aggregating all of the data from the 6 questions, all the respondents, the overall sentiment was 61.9, which reflects a pretty positive sentiment. So these are the individual questions here. So the questions were, you can see up here, just asking about your current financial condition, and just remember the 0 here is neutral. And then so overall, this was, all 3 of these skewed toward the positive. And again, workforce expansion, store expansion, expected outlook at industry. These are a little bit different because, especially with something like store expansion, just because you don't have planned store expansion, it's not necessarily a negative thing. So you might say, we are definitely not negative 100 opening stores, but you actually could have had, like on the previous slide, your expected financial condition could have still been positive. So there's a lot of ways to interpret this data. So in July, the overall between the two was, as I said, 61.9. We had also conducted this in January, 66.5. So right now we can see that the outlook was slightly less positive from January to July, but really we do need a little bit more data to start really seeing trends, especially because we're conducting this multiple times per year. Here's some insight into the respondents themselves. This is the July 2015 respondents, so just generally how many years they've been in business. The biggest group here was the most, 11 plus years in the business. And then again, retail establishments. So generally a little bit of a smaller number of establishments, 4 or more, 20%. And organization size, just give you a second to sort of read these. And this is, these numbers are in terms of net sales. This was intended to be a U.S. specific study, although we did end up with participants from a total of 20% of the survey respondents were outside of the U.S. So each dot represents a country, not a respondent. This is just the countries that were represented in the study. So we had a little bit more robustness, a little bit more worldwide data. And it does look like Korea was included. So if that was someone in this room, thank you for participating. So again, twice a year, we're continuing to gather data and then release it. Still in the beginning stages, but over time, we hope to really start to identify and predict some more trends. So those of you that are SCAA members have access to this report at a lower price. This is available in the SCAA store, or I can also talk to you more about information. We also are, making the results available, not just the entire study, which is a member benefit, but trying to make the results available for the benefit of the whole industry, not just members. The other new research project that we're conducting within the SCAA is the U.S. Specialty Coffee Price Index. So again, this is surveying retailers, but actually what we're looking at here, this is another quantitative study. What we're looking at are what retailers are charging for the price of a cup of coffee. And of course, as we all know, what's a cup of coffee? Does a latte count, hot, iced, large, small, all the different things. So we asked for 3 specific indicators. You can see them here. And we didn't specify a size or anything. It's just what that means to the retailer, the small cappuccino, the medium iced coffee, the medium drip coffee. We selected these particular items because of their popularity. So we had 164 individual responses from this. This was the first time this was conducted, and sent to retailers in the U.S. only. So here are the results. Just kind of let you take that all in. So look at this, 4 or more cafes, 1 to 3 cafes, $2.41, $1.87, big difference here. And then this is just, again, this is the results of the first set of data gathering. We may make some adjustments to the methodology as we continue to conduct this quantitative research. And the idea here is that it's useful for anyone who's conducting pricing strategy. So kind of going back, bringing it all back to the beginning, different times, different coffee. There is a lot of information to be gathered to help us better understand the coffee world that we live in. But we know that one of the things is that the only constant is change. Consumers' tastes change, their behaviors change, and research and predictive analysis is only part of what, really part of what we can do. But the more data we can put together from different sources, the more informed we become. And hopefully this gives you a good snapshot of how things are changing in the US and some of the data and research that the SCAA is conducting, and that you can add it to your collection of information and become useful in your journey through constant different times, different coffee. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We really enjoy your presentation. Thank you so much for your input. So are there any questions? I think we have quite enough time. Please. Please bring the microphone.
Yeah, I was curious with the uninterested people, when you asked that question about did they want to learn how it was made or whatever. Do you know which group it came from? Because there's a group that really goes to cafes and another group that really makes it at home.
Yeah, we called them the specialty adopters. And it was one of the things that they had in common was a frequent visiting to cafes and having these participants were more likely to drink coffee out of the home. It was something like 3 or more days a week or something like that. And I do think that the words sound a lot more loaded to us as coffee professionals than the intention really was from the focus groups. A lot of it was also this idea, one of the other themes that wasn't mentioned in here was it's my me time. So it's the 5 minutes a day that even if I'm just standing in line and getting my delicious coffee and it's part of my ritual, there was definitely this sentiment of keep your education away from me. This is my time to be quiet and reflect and enjoy something that's really special. And that was only in one of the groups that we saw that was what we called the specialty adopters. That was not necessarily true of the second group, which was the sort of super specialty consumer. They were more interested in education, but not maybe not as much as sometimes we give them.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? Maybe not. So with that, we conclude the planning session. Is it okay?
Yeah.
All right. 감사합니다. Thank you so much. Please give her a big hand.